Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, we talked to Greg Baise, President and CEO of the Illinois Manufacturers Association, and Dennis Bringuet, the owner of Ace Sign Company in Springfield, about the loss of manufacturing jobs in Illinois, as well as the lack of workers to fill those jobs. Then in about 25 minutes from now, we talked to Matt Hart, Executive Director of the Illinois Truckers Association, about an amendment that would require money received from the so-called right-to-use tax for using Illinois roads be put toward improving Illinois' roads and highways. Following that, in about 35 minutes from now, Tim Schneider, the chairman of the Illinois Republican Party, discusses the upcoming state elections and how well he believes the GOP will fare, as well as his thoughts on the presidential election and the first debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And finally, in about 1 hour and 10 minutes from now, former Governor Jim Edgar is joined with Chris Kennedy, a potential gubernatorial candidate and current chairman of Joseph Kennedy Enterprises, at a forum hosted by Andy Shaw of the Better Government Association to discuss the upcoming state elections, Governor Rauner's reform agenda, and their thoughts on the presidential campaign. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our advisory council members.
Hi, I'm Delitso Solomoyo, President of the Illinois Association of Community Action Agencies. We are an organization of 36 member agencies located around Illinois which provide needed services to our fellow citizens. It may be helping provide services at a homeless shelter or helping to provide affordable utilities to low-income people across Illinois through such programs as the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, better known as LIHEAP, or working with rural communities and helping them maintain needed community infrastructure. These are just a few of the many services provided by Illinois' community action agencies. But to provide these services efficiently and effectively, we need solid information. That's why, in addition to heading the Illinois Association of Community Action Agencies, I am also proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. I have watched the Illinois Channel for years. It provides serious coverage of the Illinois legislature, public policy discussions, and one-on-one interviews with leaders from across Illinois. It's the kind of solid, in-depth information all of us need to get beyond partisan politics and political spin and just hear directly what's happening, what's being proposed, and why. I know and you know that Illinois is filled with good people. But if we are to have good, effective public policies, we need to base those on good information. We get that from the Illinois Channel. That's why I watch it, and I hope you will too. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Springfield, we talked to Greg Baise, President and CEO of the Illinois Manufacturers Association, and Dennis Bringuet, the owner of Ace Sign Company in Springfield, about the loss of manufacturing jobs in Illinois, as well as the lack of workers to fill those jobs. This runs about 25 minutes.
Greg Baise and Dennis Bringuet, thank you for joining us on the Illinois Channel. We wanted to talk, one of the main issues that we often hear being discussed is this whole discussion about workers' compensation and what we need to do to change the business climate in Illinois. The governors often raise these issues, and we thought it would be very instructive for our viewers to be able to hear from both you, Greg, as the head of the manufacturers, and from someone who is a manufacturer. So thanks for joining us. Greg, let me start with you, just from the big picture standpoint. How is Illinois to do business in? What are you hearing from your members around the state as far as what they need changed, and why do we hear so much about workers' comp?
Well, we are talking about, and on sort of a statewide tour right now, reminding people and pointing out that Illinois has lost over 300,000 manufacturing jobs since the turn of the century. And really since the end of the 08-09 recession, many of our Midwestern neighbors have been doing better than us in bringing those jobs back. In fact, Michigan, 171,000 net jobs. Indiana, 83,000 net jobs. Illinois in that same time period is essentially flat and not increasing the number of manufacturing jobs at all. Now, is there a great difference between Michigan, Ohio, even our neighboring states, Kentucky or Iowa? I don't think so. I think that we have to be looking inward. There's a systemic problem here, and one of the reasons that we hear most often of why jobs are not coming to this state is workers' compensation, its cost to business owners. Manufacturers have an ability to possibly move to places that are less expensive. A company like Ace Sign, it's been a long-term business here in Springfield, doesn't have that luxury to just up and move because they've got a base established here. But the kind of cost and the kind of competition that a company like this faces, a lot of times workers' comp is a difference in that area. Why is Illinois bad in that area or whatever? We're the 7th highest in the nation. There's 2 areas of workers' comp that people need to remember and understand. There's the medical side. An employee is injured in the workplace, needs to go to the hospital, whatever. Workers' compensation is charged in the medical world at a higher rate than it is if you happen to have an injury at your home. Example, if you have to have a rotator cuff surgery, a surgeon and Medicare situation or a regular health care situation would charge maybe $2,500 to $3,000 for that surgery that would take place on somebody's wrist. In the workers' comp area, that might be as much as $8,000 for that same procedure. And we've allowed that to occur and allowed that to grow, and therefore that drives the cost up. The other side is that if you happen to lose the use of a body part, an arm, let's say, is injured, the calculation for the loss of that is based on the number of weeks that is calculated there, and there's a value put on it. So, for example, the use of my right arm, if I've lost that, in Illinois might be as high as $450,000. Average cost across the country, $165,000. 2.5 times that gap. Why has that occurred? And that's one of the reasons we're out sort of sounding the clarion call. We've got to make some changes in some very important areas if we're going to keep jobs in this state.
Before I go to Dennis, why has that occurred, do we know? And what would you say, you've heard all the criticisms before. Some people would say, you're not concerned about the little guy who's working hard on the job and you're going to throw them out just to cut costs.
It's not true. Owners like Dennis are very concerned about their employees. If there's an injury occur, they want them, one, to get the best medical care possible, and they want to get them back to work as soon as possible. Because the investment in an employee to be involved in running the kind of machines that we see in a facility like this, you just don't find employees who can do that well. So you want to make sure that occurs. The idea, however, is how come that the medical community is allowed to charge that much as a higher rate, and why do union leaders, not so much union members themselves, keep pushing and pushing, thinking that there's an endless pot of money that business owners have to be able to pay workers' comp premiums or the self-insured area. Why has it occurred? Well, the political situation in this state has allowed it to occur over a time period, I think, a long time period of getting there, and that's why we think some changes and why we agree with Governor Rauner in calling for work comp changes in trying to turn around Illinois' problems.
And Dennis, let's talk about you. You're in many ways representative of what we would want to have happen to businesses in Illinois. In other words, as I understand it, this business started under your grandfather. He was probably like a solo worker, but bit by bit, he added new clients. He had enough work. He had to get some help, and he hired people. Today, here you are in a really nice new facility. I mean, it's an older building that's been completely transformed. So I'm sure on one hand you've added to the tax value of this building. How many people do you have working here with Ace Sign Company?
We currently have 49. We moved here 4 years ago, we had 21.
So more than doubled in 4 years.
Correct.
Yes. You and I had talked a little bit. One of the challenges facing you, aside from workers' comp and these kind of issues, is just the issue of skilled labor and finding good people to hire.
Absolutely, absolutely. There seems to be a little bit of lacking of schools that people can go to learn certain trades, electrical skills, sheet metal, welding, those types of things. Lincoln Land Community College has done a great job with their career center. We need more of that, or even in the high school level, perhaps some more used to be shop classes that I don't think are quite as prevalent these days. But it is difficult to find good skilled labor. A lot of folks get out of college with a $100,000 debt and no job, and they may not have the skills that they need to do the types of things that our business and many other businesses, I hear the same thing. That so we would be in favor of doing whatever we could to facilitate or help bring in more vocational type of schools.
I think some of the countries like Germany have a specific program to develop some of the trades, and we hear that somewhat in the legislature. When you go looking to do a hire, approximately, how many people do you have to interview before you find the right person?
I would say on an average of probably 10 or 12.
And to the extent that it's that difficult to find someone who has the skills and as expensive and time-consuming as it is to hire someone, I guess that would go to the point that you're not looking to have that person injured on the job and be unable to be productive.
Well, that's true, and also another factor is I'm not that familiar with the laws, but there is a causation situation to where I believe if 51% of the injury is caused at work, we should be responsible, but that's not the way it is now. The problem is they could be hurt at their swimming pool at home and claim a hurt shoulder or whatever, and we all pay for it.
How have your insurance rates, work comp insurance rates, changed over the years?
They've gone up significantly, yeah, and we've had really good records, but if you have, for every injury you have, no matter how small it is, your rates are going to go up.
And when you have to put that money out, we see it with the state. The state puts more and more money out for pensions. They don't have the money for other things. Right. When your costs go up for work comp, what kind of belt tightening or changes have you had to make that otherwise you might have made in the business?
Well, our business is a lot like most businesses. Our budgets need to be balanced. And you know, it's difficult to do when all those rates are going up constantly. So we have to make some very tough decisions on whether we can afford to hire or whether we sub out work to other places out of state. Sometimes very easy just to have someone else out of state do some of that work. And of course that means that our local people aren't getting that work.
Have there been positions that you wanted to fill, but because of the costs increasing that you haven't hired people?
Yes. Well, and finding people is still the largest problem. Yes.
Greg, Dennis brought up the causation, and that's a big issue. What in this discussion of workers' comp, explain to us why that matters.
Well, Illinois has really a almost zero or just almost 1% cause in the workplace makes the business owner responsible for that injury. And so a lot of soft tissue issues, as an example, lower back, neck injuries, things of that nature that may have been caused from a car accident, might have been caused in an old football injury of some sort like that, but gets aggravated in the workplace, the responsibility goes to that particular employer. We also have the situation to where the Work Comp Commission will look at things and they'll say there could be, but it hardly ever, especially if it goes on into the court system, is ever shared with any kind of responsibility. Our answer to that is that we think that has to be looked in total. I think it'll be very difficult to pass in the legislature a total 51% cause or whatever. So we need to tighten that area, but we also need to look, as I said earlier, medical cost and the indemnity side of this. The system costs about $3 billion a year. That's in insurance premiums paid out or self-insured insurers or companies that have to take responsibility for. And you know, there's a lot of people feeding off that system. The lawyers on both sides, the medical professionals, whether it's orthopedic surgeons to chiropractors to physical therapy on that side of it. And they fight like crazy to any kind of reforms or any kind of balancing of the work comp cost to other states. And that's what is just very maddening to business owners and organizations like ours that represent companies like this, and saying, folks, 300,000 jobs, if you put all those people since the turn of the century in one place, you'd have Illinois' second largest city. Don't we understand what that means to our state's economy? Don't we understand about those families, and manufacturing is usually 1.5 to 2 jobs are created for every manufacturing job is created. And we've got flat growth in this state. We really need to get this cause out there more, and we need to make sure, whether you're Republican or Democrat, that you say this is an area we ought to work together and solve this problem.
You had mentioned in a speech recently at the City Club of Chicago that I think even Idaho created more manufacturing jobs than Illinois did. I think they were 9,000. Ours is 4,000.
4,000, and as I said, our last month, the number came out that those actually 4,000 jobs disappeared in the manufacturing sector in the last month. And no cry of alarm, no saying, what are we going to do here, folks? I mean, Springfield is an example of this. There used to be a vibrant manufacturing sector in this town. Those have all gone away. And look at what the hole that's created in some of the neighborhoods in the city of Springfield. The violence that's going on in Chicago, where's it happening? It's happening in areas where manufacturing used to be very prevalent in that area. But in Chicago, Cook County, they've got tax policies that are literally driving businesses out of that county and looking for, if they're staying in Illinois, elsewhere in the region, or looking out of state.
I know, Dennis, I mean, from running a business back in the 1980s, it's not just your job, but you're buying materials from any number of other suppliers to your business, right?
Absolutely, we sure are.
What kind of things would you be buying, and are you buying those in Illinois or from out of state?
Well, we try to buy most of it in Illinois. Unfortunately, we're finding that more and more of them are out of state. But we buy a lot of raw aluminum and steel, plastics, inks, paint, products that we use quite a bit of.
And what he just said there, Terry, is the thing about Illinois manufacturing. We are across the spectrum in various products. You mentioned steel, we're a big steel processing state. Plastics in the chemical industry, a big area in that regard. The whole paints and all of that kind of area are made in this state, and we still are very competitive, mainly because our workforce in this state is a good and trainable workforce. But the problem is, too many of them are beginning to look like me and Dennis, in the fact as we move along in the baby boom bubble, are retiring. So the need for the kind of vocational education aspects and certification of people being able to do a job is even more and more needed in this state. So when we have vacancies in the manufacturing arena and can't fill them because of that, that even should drive us even more crazy, because we can solve that problem.
And we're finding that we need to do more and more training in-house, and that's very expensive when you bring someone in who has basically a very low skill level, and we have to train them. It can take a lot of time and resources and money to do that. And then, of course, you always run the risk of that person perhaps not sticking around, and so it's a loss.
And all that time and training, it goes out the door.
Right, right. So we would much rather support community colleges or universities that recognize that and could help in that regard.
Greg, when we look at the other states that you say, and they're growing in the same national economy that Illinois is in, what are they doing right that we're not doing?
Well, for example, we have various tax credits that are at the moment expired. Research and development tax credit. We are a state that, I was talking earlier about the sectors, pharmaceutical manufacturing as an example. Number of jobs in the northern part of the state directly involved in them. The research and development of what those companies are doing are their lifeblood. They're not looking at the product that they're selling today. They're already developing the replacements for that 5, 6, 10 years down the road. We as a state like this don't have a credit, a tax credit. Those other states do for that kind of activity. Just crazy that we don't have it. Manufacturers purchase credit are another example. Items that are purchased that are not directly related in the process of manufacturing, you get a credit in sales tax for those kinds of things. It's a headache for companies like ACE to be able to keep up with all that paperwork. We should streamline it and make it easier, and those states do that kind of thing as well. Those states also have their fiscal house in order. Illinois does not. Dennis and I were talking before we went on air about they do business with the state. They have to wait for their payment from the state like other vendors lined up for that. Essentially, state government is financing its activities on the back of small businesses like Ace. That's just wrong.
And our employees and our vendors don't wait. We pay them every week.
And you pay your taxes on time.
The taxes are paid on time. That's right. Yeah, it's a challenge.
I was talking to a farmer, and you talk to basically anyone in business. Another major issue is regulations. And what people say, it's not a question of no regulations. We want sensible regulations, and one where the paperwork where you can still be doing your job and not become a person who's filling out forms every day.
Yeah, you see these little neon signs that you see around here? They're all powered by little transformers. Like fluorescent lamps have a little ballast. And EPA came in here one day and said, well, these are transformers, they must have PCBs in them. Well, after 9 months of us hiring consultants and lawyers and going through lab tests and spending $12,000, we proved that they didn't have PCBs in them.
Did the EPA give you your 12 grand back for forcing you to do that?
They didn't even say I'm sorry.
Greg, how much of when we look at the state, is that also an issue statewide that the legislature needs to be addressing? Regulation?
Absolutely it is. And the sort of a notion, we joke almost, that in Illinois we make it harder for you to do business than easier to do business. And when you made the question about what are other states doing, you look at their economic development departments, that they're not trying to throw up roadblocks, as an example, to a company to operate. They're trying to facilitate and help that. Governor Rauner's administration is attempting to do a transformation in DECO and others in trying to make it a more business-friendly operation, not to throw open the door to have dangerous workplaces or not following federal environmental protection acts or things of that nature, but just get through the process of the kind of permitting process that a company like this has to operate in. It should just be easier. And again, the reason for this, remember, 300,000 jobs gone. And those are jobs that are never coming back. A lot of people say, well, automation and those kind of things, robots are now doing the jobs. That's not true. I mean, some of those jobs would have disappeared, there's no doubt, because manufacturers are doing things more efficiently, more productivity out of their employees all the time. But what we have got to have with this whole thing is a change in the view of what's going on, and that's what I'm going to continue to harp on. Day in and day out, when the legislature gets back. In fact, I may get Dennis to do a big sign on the side of our building in Springfield to say $300,000 jobs gone. What are you going to do about it to the legislature and things of that nature, so that they're reminded of that every time they come to town?
And we just came from taping an event, and a comment was made that relative to higher education, we have other states picking off our students because of all the turmoil that's going on. Do we have similarly other states coming in here and knocking on the doors of manufacturers and saying, come to Indiana, come to Wisconsin?
All the time. In that speech you mentioned, referenced in Chicago, I said, you know, I started in this business back in the late 70s. And if you'd have told me in the 78 that one of these days Indiana would be putting up billboards making fun of us and getting our jobs to go to Indiana, you'd have gone, no way that's ever going to happen. But it happens. I was driving out of Illinois and going to a wedding, and 3 billboards before I got out of the Chicago area saying that very thing. You're annoyed at Illinois, come to Indiana, a state that works. They are coming all the time. They're always knocking on the doors of our members, and it's just crazy that that's happening.
One last question, Dennis, for you. No business stands still, especially in this day and age of technology, and you need to have some profits that you don't get to put in your pocket, but to set aside so that you can be buying the newer thing, the newer tools, so that you can stay current. Is that right? Because as we looked around, we see these old neon signs from 50, 60 years ago. Today's signs are constantly changing, upscale, brand new. How much of a challenge is that to run a business and stay technologically current?
It's a huge challenge. That piece of equipment right there is $150,000. We just put it in about 9 months ago. And just regular maintenance. As we speak, we got $50,000 worth of roof work being done as we speak. And what we're finding is that as we save money to try to pay for upgrades, we're taxed on that money then. So it's like there needs to be a system where we can have like an escrow account or something that is not taxed on those dollars so that it'll encourage businesses to be able to save and to invest it as they need it.
And that's the key issue right there. A company like this, the lifeblood is what kind of money they're putting back into the business all the time. The day that a company stops reinvesting in its facilities, you can start to set the timetable when that building or that facility is going to close. It's always a key factor. And when companies like this invest, it's money back into the community that they're doing when they're buying the kind of materials for this roof or those kinds of things. I think people just have to understand the cycle and the circle that this all goes in.
My grandfather used to always say, if you're not growing, you're dying. It's true.
Well, and I would just point out to people something they can relate to. I mean, years ago, their first mobile phone was probably a flip phone. It was a great invention at the time, state of the art. Anyone who's just producing flip phones today.
This is the 6th generation. The 7th generation is coming, and this isn't even 10 years. The technology of an iPhone is not even 10 years old yet.
No. Well, gentlemen, we wish you well. Greg, maybe before I close out, what would you say to either the viewers? What should they do? Should they contact their lawmakers? Right. What kind of things can they, if they say, we get it, but what can one person do? What can they do?
Right now, the politicians, it's late September, knocking on doors asking for votes. When one of them comes to your door, you ought to start asking, what are you doing about trying to stem the loss of manufacturing in this state? What are you trying to do to get the fiscal house in order? What are you doing in trying to make sure that there's skilled workforce there? Give me your answers, and don't tell me that, well, we're really working on it, or bills or whatever. I want to hear about it when you get back to Springfield, that you're doing those kind of things. Whether you go to Rock Island and see the loss of manufacturing jobs, that community, you drive in on the north side of Peoria. I've coined the phrase that Illinois is closing one day at a time because of the inaction of our governmental leaders.
You need to wake up.
They do.
Gentlemen, we wish you well, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Next, from Springfield, we speak with Matt Hart, Executive Director of the Illinois Trucking Association, about a constitutional amendment that will appear on the November ballot, which would require the state to spend transportation funds only on transportation projects. This runs about 10 minutes. Matt Hart, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. One of the issues that's going to be on the ballot this year, and I think a lot of people haven't focused on it, is going to be a constitutional amendment that has to do with keeping the money that is taken on behalf of spending for transportation projects like roads and bridges. This constitutional amendment would say the state has to spend that money for the purposes for which it was collected. We wanted to get your thoughts and why is your organization supporting it, and what is the issue as you see it?
Sure. Well, the Illinois Trucking Association supports many people are referring to it, the Safe Roads Amendment, but there will be the opportunity on the ballot this fall to vote on the constitutional amendment that would ensure that the money that the government, the state of Illinois, collects, that is collected under the assumption that you're paying money, you're paying a user fee, which is a special tax. It's a user fee that is supposed to go to roads and bridges and other safety projects, public service safety projects that are out there, that money actually goes to the projects that it's intended. In Illinois, over the last decade or more, we've gotten into a really bad habit of taking some of that money, that user fee money, and we've been diverting it. We've been using it to fund pensions. We've been using it for non-highway purposes, non-road fund purposes. And it's actually made it very difficult for us to invest in our roads or even seek an additional investment in our roads when this is a fundamental problem that we've got to fix first, to make sure that the money that we are collecting for roads goes into roads. Every time the motorist fuels up, whether you're putting gasoline in your car or diesel fuel in a truck, you're paying, and it doesn't say it on the receipt, but in there is a cents per gallon motor fuel tax or user fee that you are paying, and that system has worked well for several decades. Unfortunately, elected officials in Illinois in a recent history have seen that revenue as an opportunity to fund pensions, to fund shortfalls in the state's general revenue fund, and so they've been sweeping money out of that road fund. And we think this is a good first step in restoring trust with the public, and certainly trust in our industry, in the trucking industry, that when the state of Illinois says we're going to collect a user fee or a tax from you and it's going to be used for a certain purpose, that we indeed use it for that purpose.
And just as a little bit of a background for the people, because government makes things unnecessarily complicated sometimes, we have what we call the, most people, when we talk about the budget, we're really only talking about a portion of the budget. We're talking about the general revenue funds, which can be spent in a general way. There's a whole lot of other money that's part of the budget of Illinois, state budget, that are designated funds. And so, as you were just saying, every time they gas up, how much is it? It's a percentage, or is it a flat fee that goes in? I believe it's a percentage.
Well, in Illinois, we pay several taxes. We pay a cents per gallon tax on gasoline and diesel fuel on the state level. We pay a cents per gallon tax to the federal government. And then in Illinois, we also charge a sales tax, a percentage tax on that as well. So we're actually paying a tax on a tax. It's one of the reasons that makes us a very expensive state in which to operate. We're the fourth highest. We have the fourth highest diesel fuel tax rate in the nation. We've got the fifth highest license plate registration fees in the nation. And overall, Illinois is about the fifth or sixth most expensive state in which to operate a truck. So we're spending a lot of money. Again, and that's money that we're certainly willing to pay. But it's money that we've been told this money is needed to pay for roads. But over the last decade or so, that much of that money is not being spent on roads. It's been diverted to other parts of state government.
And how much money, do we know, have a figure? How much money approximately has been diverted over the years?
It's hard to tell, but most people are guessing it's around $6.8 billion has been diverted out of the road fund, out of user fees that normally would have gone to build highways, to build bridges, to build infrastructure, to move our economy forward. You know, trucking in this state, we move about 78% of all the freight in this state. We're very, very much reliant on trucks in this state. We serve over 70% of the communities in Illinois rely exclusively on a truck that can travel down a highway. And if we've got highways that are crumbling, if we've got roads that are under repair and we can't get the truck that's got the groceries to the grocery store, if we can't get your truck that's got gasoline for your car to the gas station, that becomes a big problem for citizens of Illinois.
Well, and let me just say to the viewers, it's not obviously just a trucker, because if you're sitting in traffic every day, Highway 55, when I try to get out of Chicago, come back to Springfield, becomes a parking lot at about 3:30 or so. Sure. And any number of these roads would be improved. We might add an extra lane, right? We're going to fix the potholes. So it's all of that. And then for you, or your members, I should say, when you have a trucker stuck in traffic like that, they're losing productivity because that's their investment. They get paid to move freight from point A to point B, right? And if they're stuck sitting in an hour in traffic or 2 hours in traffic, when it might be a 30-minute drive instead of an hour-and-a-half drive, that's obviously a continuing, almost like another tax, you might say, because it makes our economy inefficient, right?
Absolutely, and it affects everybody. Congestion, particularly in Chicago, is a huge problem, but it affects everybody downstate. It affects a local manufacturer in Peoria who's making products in Peoria and they're trying to ship them to an assembly plant in Chicago, or they're trying to ship them to an assembly plant in Michigan where they're going through Chicago. This affects everybody in the state of Illinois. And let me just ask, how many great highway construction projects have we done in Illinois in the last 10 or 15 years? How much capacity have we added in the state in the last 10 or 15 years? And it's almost zero, because we're not investing in our roads. We continue to have more people traveling our roads. We've got more business that's using our roads, but we haven't invested and increased the number of lane miles hardly at all in the state of Illinois in the past 10 or 15 years, whereas the decades leading up to that, that's been part of the reason that Illinois is so successful overall as a state in the nation, because we have been investing in our roads. We've been investing in our bridges. That's something that we haven't done over the last 12 to 13 years.
I talked to a major manufacturer, representative of a major Illinois manufacturer, and they said, who is involved in the farm industry, they said in Brazil the land is cheaper, the labor's cheaper, the growing season's longer, but the thing that the United States has is better transportation. But they said we're losing that edge. So, people need to understand This isn't just about some guy driving a truck. This is really about the whole economy. The people in Pana, a small town in southern Illinois, it's still hard to get there, and so they can't attract businesses to their locale because you're going to be stuck in a two-lane road. And just outside of Springfield, we have Taylorville, where it's a lot of state employees work. It's a two-lane road each way, which makes it longer to get to the capital. But the other point is, it's often nicknamed Blood Alley because the number of accidents that have happened there and people being killed because there's so much traffic on these two-lane roads. And that was supposed to have been upgraded to a four-lane road when George Ryan came in. So I think this goes to your point.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I was a little boy in Taylorville, growing up in Taylorville, when we first were told that we were going to get 4 lanes from Taylorville all the way to Springfield. And it's something that we've watched over the decades finally become a reality. But it's taken a long time. There's a lot of people that have paid a price along the way. There's no doubt that we know how to design roads. We know how to make them safe for cars and for trucks that are traveling on the highway. There's no reason that we shouldn't be investing in roads that are safer for truck drivers, safer for automobile drivers that we share the road with. It's 2016. We should be investing in the safest roadways out there, and we're still traveling on a lot of our roads that were designed back in the 40s and 50s.
Let me, just as we close out, is there a danger in taking this approach? Because if we mandate that money to be spent the way it's supposed to be spent, that we're taking managerial latitude away from the governor and the legislature, so that there's a crisis, and maybe we don't have enough, I'm making something up, but maybe we don't have enough gas money to put into the state troopers' cars. And they go, well, we normally would have taken some money out of the roads fund, but now we can't do that. Is this bad government policy to be mandating that money that's collected for a purpose must absolutely be spent just for that purpose?
Well, I think it's never a bad thing when you actually spend money for what you said you were going to collect the money for. You got to remember, government by its very nature doesn't generate money. They only take money from others and then give it to other places. And we're going to have a system in Illinois where we have a user fee, and the government says we're going to collect money from the truck driver, we're going to collect money from the automobile driver, and we're going to take a portion of that and we're going to invest it in roads. I think most people in Illinois would say, I'm willing to pay that as long as you live up to your end of the bargain and that it is actually invested in roads. I think that there's no way you can lose in that regard. And if it does create other holes in the budget, then let's have a discussion about how do we fix those other places. But we shouldn't be, right now we've got a shell game going on of where do we draw funds to fund different parts of the state government. And I think most people in Illinois want honesty and integrity from their elected officials, and they want their tax money to be going for the purposes that they believe that it's going towards.
All right, so that'll be on the November ballot, another decision that the voters will have to face. We appreciate you explaining it to us.
Thanks so much, Terry.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.
Hi, I'm Dave Treader, president of the Federation of Independent Illinois Colleges and Universities. For years, Illinois was known around the world for the quality of its colleges and universities, and not just our public universities, but the many private schools that do such a great job educating more students annually than the publics. Schools like Bradley University in Peoria, Millikan University in Decatur, Loyola University in Chicago, and Northwestern University in Evanston. These are just a few examples of the schools that not only educate the next generation, but also serve as economic engines for their communities, with tens of millions of dollars in payroll and the purchasing of millions of dollars in local services. In fact, the combined economic impact of Illinois' private colleges and universities is over $20 billion annually. Collectively, these schools account for $3.5 billion in state tax revenues annually. Illinois' independent colleges and universities are a key pillar of the economy, bringing billions of dollars to the Illinois economy, as well as adding a cultural richness to our communities. That's why it's important that the state programs like the Monetary Award Program, which enables low-income Illinois residents to attend college in our great state, remain funded. And it's also why it's important for all of us to understand the economic impact of our colleges and universities have on the Illinois economy and our communities. This
This is why I'm also happy to serve on the Illinois Channel Advisory Council on Higher Education. Their statewide, in-depth coverage of the issues that impact our economy, our government, and our cultural resources help to inform us all on the issues that matter. I'm Dave Tretter, President of the Federation of Independent Illinois Colleges and Universities, and proud to be a member of the Illinois Channel Advisory Council.
Next, from Chicago, Tim Schneider, the chairman of the Illinois Republican Party, discusses the upcoming state elections and how well he believes the GOP will fare, as well as his thoughts on the presidential election and the first debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. This runs about 35 minutes.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. With leave, I'd like to take a moment of personal privilege and express my sadness for the loss of Paul Green. I knew Paul 30 years ago. Paul Green, when I was a township official, Paul Green was a staple at all the township events. He was there for everything. He had the greatest wit and the most charming wisdom of anybody that I knew in that circuit, and I will really miss his ramblings between Chris and Paul up here on the stage, and he'll be sorely missed. Also, someone who's left our midst. Yesterday, we mourned the loss at our county board meeting of Commissioner Joan Murphy. Joan and I wrangled a lot. We didn't get along very often. We were on opposite sides of the fence most of the time. But I'll tell you that in one particular case, when I was just a newly elected commissioner, we fought really hard on an issue, and of course, it was 13-4 Democrat over Republican at the county board at the time. So they won, and after the meeting, Joan comes up to me and she says, "Where are we going?" And I go, "What do you mean, where are we going?" She goes, "Where are we going for lunch?" And that's the way Joan was. She didn't care. And when the board meeting was over, the politics ended, and we went about our own way. You know, we could disagree without being disagreeable, and I think we need to go back in that direction a lot more in today's society. So, with that being said, those two great people are gone from our midst, and we must move on. I want to tell you a little bit about my history, and some of you have heard a few of these things about me in the past. You know, they say to people say they don't care what you know until they know how much you care. And I started out watching my father be extorted by Cook County building inspectors at our business. We had a 9-hole golf course out in unincorporated Cook County, and every time a Cook County building inspector would come out, now my father was a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps in the Pacific, and he would be extorted for $25 or $50 by the building inspectors, or else he'd have to call my mom up. I remember, hey, Mama, she called her Mama, can you make some lunch for these guys? You know, and so my mom would have to hurry, make some lunch, and bring it down to the golf course, which was, the house was right next to the golf course, and make these guys lunch. Now, my dad and mom were people that got up at 6 in the morning and worked till usually midnight every day, 8 or 9 months a year, and here they are catering to these guys so they won't write an egregious, building inspection violation, which was really nonsense to begin with. So I saw that, and then when I was 26 years old, I general contracted my first house, and it was in unincorporated Cook County, and I took my 6 plats of survey, my 4 sets of plans, my plumbing isometrics, my electrical drawings, took them all down to the county, laid them on the counter, and the advisor for the building department said, "Come on, lay all these out. I'll be back when you get them all rolled out, laid on the table." He went back behind his cubicle. He didn't come out for an hour to look at my plans. Then he found something wrong with my plans, and he sent me on my way. Came back the next time. I had them all laid out on the counter, laid out all 24 sets of different plans. He's standing down there about 15 feet away. He said, "What are you doing down there? Roll all those up, bring them down here and unroll them in front of me." And all he had to do was walk 6 steps down to where I was. I said, this kind of thing has to end. And then I went over to the township, and something that really bothers me a lot is the fact that government employees or government elected officials seem to think that they're above the people they serve. And so we had a township clerk in Hanover Township that really looked down on people. She said, "What can I help you?" You know, and that's the way she was every time I would go in there. So I said, "Well, I'm going to run for township trustee." So I ran for township trustee. I won, and lo and behold, the next election, she decided not to run for re-election. Subsequent to that, I decided to step up. Well, in between the time of that and running for the county board, I ran for highway commissioner in Hanover Township because I found out the highway commissioner was putting township gas in his own car. So I said, "That's wrong." He said, "I'll just keep doing this all I want." And so subsequently I beat him. And a couple years later, I ran for the Cook County board. And the story I don't tell too many people, but I was successful in being elected to the Cook County board. But a year after I was elected to the Cook County board, one of the department heads from the county took me to lunch. He took me to lunch, and I wonder why he wants to take me to lunch. He told me that if I would support Todd Stroger's 1% sales tax increase, that I would not have any trouble getting reelected the next term. And he said that I will also give you some jobs if you'd like some jobs. And I might find some contracts for some of your friends. And I said, "Well, that's not why I ran for this job. I ran for this to just completely eliminate exactly what you're telling me you want to do." And so I got up and I left. Now, stories like this are not unique to me. I'm sure most of you, elected officials or not, have had some type of unsavory experience with government, either from working inside the government like I do or outside and working with government. But I tell you, it's just wrong. It's just wrong. Government exists to serve the people. It's not for the insiders and the politicians to be enriched working from the inside. And that's what's happening too often in our state and our nation today. That's why I think people are so outraged with our government today. Is our nation stronger, safer, more economically well off than it was 10 years ago? Is our state stronger, safer, more economically well off than it was a decade ago? I don't think so. So today, that's what I'm here to talk to you about. Ronald Reagan often said, "The status quo is Latin for the mess we're in." I think we can agree the status quo really isn't working here in Illinois. It isn't working in our nation as well. Our national debt is approaching $20 trillion. Our federal deficit each year is $500 billion. There's poor job growth numbers, incomes are stagnant, and our enemies are inching ever closer to our borders. So let's talk about our presidential election just for a little bit here this morning. Now, I know that most of you have probably already made your minds up, and I'm not going to try and change your minds, but the choice is pretty clear for me. I'm going to warn you, I'm going to start getting a little bit partisan, and I'm not here to offend anybody, but it's probably part of what I'm supposed to do. First of all, Donald Trump. Donald Trump, he can be rude. He can be rude. He can be off base on some things. Say things we might not agree upon. But he's not beholden to anybody. He's created thousands of jobs. He wants to secure our borders. He wants to protect our national defense and bring jobs back to America. On the other hand, you have a person that calls all of us that are Trump supporters in the room deplorable. That we're xenophobic, we're Islamophobic, we're racist. Or if we're not any of those things, we're just a bunch of sad sacks who are duped by this idea of making America great again. I'm pretty sure that I don't fall into either one of those baskets, and I'm sure if there's any Trump supporters in the room, you don't feel like you fall into that basket either. I believe that Hillary Clinton did wrong with Whitewater. I think she was wrong in Benghazi. I think she was wrong with the Iran nuclear deal. I think she was wrong with her email scandal. And all the while, she amassed a $200 million fortune. $200 million fortune. She never sold a widget. She never made anything. All I think she did to amass that fortune is sell influence. So to me, it's an easy choice. I choose rude over wrong. Right, Richard? So And now briefly about our United States Senate seat. You know, Mark Kirk is an inspiration to me every day. He's a strong advocate for Illinois. He's been a warrior for good government and a strong national defense. Now, I spend just about all my time downstate defending what most people in this room want, and that's somebody who compromises, who gets along with both sides of the aisle, who can be bipartisan and work for compromise. But when I go down to Southern Illinois, trust me, there's usually a line from here to the door when I speak of people who say they can't vote for Mark Kirk. I said, you can't vote for Mark Kirk? Why can't you vote for Mark Kirk? Well, he's not Republican enough. But you say you want compromise. You say you want people that work with the other side. Well, I just can't vote for him. I said, do you agree with Mark Kirk 80% of the time? Well, yeah. Well, that doesn't make him a 20% traitor. You know, when I go to Washington, I talk to, and I mostly make most of these comments to Republican groups, but I was in Washington a couple months ago, and Reince Priebus says, you know, he said, Republicans, you know, united together, the impossible is possible. Divided, the possible is impossible. So we need to stay together. All of us Republicans in the room, and hopefully some independents that we might steer our way. One of my great colleagues on the county board, about 6 months into the, we used to go to lunch. We still go to lunch quite often. He came up to me and said, we love you Republicans. You're our best kept secret. You argue and argue and argue all the way through the primary. Democrats do the same thing. After the primary, we all get together and we vote for our nominee. You keep arguing all the way through the general election, and you never win anything. And that's what we do. We've got to collectively stay together. So a lot of what I do is just try and go around the state of Illinois and keep our Republicans together, because I think we have the right ideas, which I'll talk to you about. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk to you a little about the state of Illinois. Our state is broken. That's no surprise to hopefully most, if not all of you in this room. Last February, Gallup found that 74% of the people in Illinois have no confidence in their state government. 3 out of every 4 people in the state of Illinois have no confidence in their state government. Why? Because we have a history of budget deficits, $115 billion in pension liability, $8.5 billion in unpaid bills. Job growth is non-existent in the state. Do you know that Cook County lost 11,000 people last year, more than any other county in the United States? And in the last decade, Illinois has lost 1 million people. That's why we lost 1 congressional seat in the last remap. We're losing people. And yet, it's funny, 2/3 of our legislators in this election this fall have no opposition. 2/3 of our legislators have no opposition in November. Why? Gerrymandering of our Illinois House and Senate districts. The best recent example of the urgent need for reform in Illinois is ruling by the Illinois Supreme Court on the independent maps amendment. That was citizen-driven, wildly popular, had bipartisan support. Over 500,000 people signed the independent maps petition, and yet Mike Madigan's lawyers swooped in, argued their case, and they blocked it. Madigan won. The people of Illinois lost. And don't you think, I was standing, it was a surprise at our Illinois State Fair, Republican Day of the State Fair, we had these buttons and it had a picture of Mike Madigan on them 45 years ago. Because Mike Madigan's been in Springfield for 45 years. 45 years. Is it time at some point to step down? You know, he's been there for 45 years. Can we say term limits in this room? So Mike Madigan draws the map, protects his incumbents, backs them with tons of cash, and then in turn, what do? They vote his way. Now, I've got no problem with that if it benefited the people of Illinois. If we had balanced budgets, we had no pension deficit, if our bills were paid, if our social service safety net was provided for, if people were moving into the state, if there were more jobs in Illinois, that'd all be great. But it's not. The state is in awful condition. We have fewer jobs, higher taxes, antiquated schools, more crime, and no reform. The only industry growing in Illinois is U-Hauls. That's like, is that the legacy that Mike Madigan wants to leave this state? I hope not. I hope not. I was hoping that he and the governor would be able to work together, blame one another for things that were unpopular with their side of the aisle and work together towards something. But it hasn't happened because he's unwilling to move. So I'll tell you a little bit about our governor. It was February of 2013. I heard that there was this guy running for governor of Illinois, or considering running at the time. He hadn't even put his foot in the ring yet. And I asked if I could meet him. And I met him. We talked for a couple hours. And he said everything I wanted to hear somebody say that wanted to change and turn Illinois around. So I said I was all in. And we did some pretty neat things in Cook County in the fall of 2013 in a 4-person race. We were able to get an endorsement by the Cook County Republican organization in a 4-way race. You needed 60% of the vote for one candidate. He said it couldn't be done, but we did it. And he won the primary, and he went on to win the general election. I'll tell you, this is a guy that can't be bought, he can't be bribed, and he cannot be intimidated. He's the hardest working person I've ever seen. I tell most people, and maybe you've heard the story from me before, that he called me up one night and he asked me if I'd want to go on a bus tour with him. And I said, sure. It was his first bus tour into Southern Illinois. And I said, sure, when are we going? He said, well, tomorrow morning. And I said, okay, I'll clear my schedule. What time do we have to leave? He said, well, we've got to be down in Mount Vernon at 7 o'clock. So that meant we had to leave at 3 o'clock in the morning. So we got on the bus at 3 o'clock in the morning, drove down to Mount Vernon, did a waffle stop in Mount Vernon. Then we went to Nashville, Oakville, DuQuoin, Percy, Sparta, Chester, Waterloo, and Bloomington, all in our first day. We went all day long without eating, got to the hotel at 10 o'clock at night, said, what time do we get up in the morning, to his staff? I think it was Nick, and it'd be 6:30 or 7, and we did it again the next day. We hit 29 cities in 3 days, and he gave 36 speeches, and in between that time he was giving radio interviews and calling his friends for money for the election. This is the kind of guy that will work unendingly to turn Illinois around, because I've seen how hard he worked to get elected for the people of Illinois. This guy will work as hard as he can. And the Democrats in Springfield, Mike Madigan, John Cullerton, the Democrats, they don't get this guy, because it's not about power. It's about the people. They don't understand anybody like him. That's an anomaly. All he cares about is people. He can move anywhere he wants. He can move anywhere in the country or the world, for that matter, that he wanted to. But he's chosen to put his foot down and lay his roots right here and try to build a better Illinois. So I hear often enough that our governor is destroying our state. He's eliminating our social service safety net, and it drives me crazy. You're going to blame a guy that's been in office for not even 2 years for the dire condition of the state for the last 3 decades? That's not a Bruce Rauner's making. It's Bruce Rauner that's trying to fix it and get it right and turn our state around. And the only way to do this is pro-growth and pro-business policies. It's the only way we can turn the state around. You can't raise taxes enough to turn this state around. Look what we've done by raising taxes over the last decade. We're losing population every year because people have choices. Taxes get too high, hey, I'm going to go somewhere else. And when those people leave, when those 11,000 people left Cook County, and when those 1 million people left the state of Illinois in the last decade, who ends up paying their share of the taxes? Everybody that's left. And when some of us decide to leave, then the rest of us are going to be paying. And pretty soon there's going to be one table here instead of a room this big, and those people are going to say, I can't afford it anymore, and there won't be anything left to provide for our social service safety net. So don't try to ever tell me that taxes are the reason, that the only way we can solve our problems. We need to solve our problems through pro-growth, pro-business solutions that bring jobs and businesses back into Illinois. Now we're going to try and win some House and Senate seats here in November, and I think we're going to be successful. You know, the Illinois Republican Party has never been as strong as it is today. Now I went on my first state chairman's fly-in to Raleigh, North Carolina, and I flew into Raleigh, and all these state chairmen from all the states are there, and I'm this new young guy in the room. Well, I'm not so young, but I was the youngest state chairman in the room, and they said, listen, there's one thing we have to tell you before you learn anything else. Take credit for everything you get right in your state, because you're going to get blamed for everything that goes wrong. So I'll take credit for it, but the credit really goes to our great governor and to great people like John Fogarty, our counsel, Nick Klitzing, our executive director, and our great Republican National Committeeman, Richard Porter, right over there. These people are the great people that back me up and make me look good every day. But this year, we've got the data, we've got the digital, we've got the resources, we've got the ground game, we got everything going that we had in 2014 when the governor won, and we've got more than that. But generally, there'll be a tracker in one of these rooms, and the next thing I tell you about how many people we have out on the streets and how many doors we've knocked and how many phone calls we've made, it'll show up on Capitol Facts in about an hour, so I'm not going to give in to that and tell you what we're doing, totally. But we're not going to stop until we've achieved complete reform here in Illinois. That means more jobs, higher wages, and a larger tax base to fully fund our schools. We need to build our infrastructure back, our roads and bridges. And with our pro-growth, pro-business policies, we can't do that. We can do that. We can't do it with higher taxes. We need workers' comp reform, tort reform, term limits, and redistricting reform. Now, I don't like to be political, and I don't think that's a political agenda. It's about what's right for ensuring the future of our generations to come here in Illinois. You know, you can't take much away from me, and you can't take much away from a lot of the people in this room, but we can take a lifetime away from our children and our grandchildren, and we can't do that. My son, my 24-year-old son, moved to Austin, Texas last year. He said, Dad, I can't stay in Illinois anymore. The taxes are too high. And he's a smart kid. He said, Dad, can you imagine when they come up with these pension fixes in Illinois? The pension, if I live in the city of Chicago, which is where I want to live, we're going to have a state pension fix, we're going to have a county pension fix, we're going to have a Chicago employee pension fix, we're going to have a Chicago police, fire, Chicago teachers union pension fix. That's going to double or triple my taxes all by itself. Before you hire another teacher, before you fix a road, before you put a firefighter in a firehouse, it's going to bankrupt this state. What is this state going to do? I can't be here and watch it happen because it's going to just bankrupt everybody. We need to find common sense solutions to these problems, and I think the Republican solutions are the ones that are going to get it done. Now we know we've got an uphill battle. It's going to be an uphill battle. We've got a presidential year. Presidential years are tough for Republicans. More Democrats come out in presidential years. And the gerrymandering of our districts that's been done in our House and Senate seats has been masterful. Mike Madigan has done a great, I got to tell you, he's done a wonderful job. But with our staff and the ground game we've got and the resources we've got, we're going to win House and Senate seats in November. I'm not going to tell you how many, but I got a number in my mind, and I think we're going to do okay. And then I think maybe somebody will stand up and take notice. And then we're also going to win, hopefully, for our great comptroller, Leslie Munger. Leslie's a great, great lady, and she's doing a marvelous job. You know, a lot of legislators in Springfield are on pins and needles because they're not getting paid. You know, they're not getting paid any faster than the people that are providing services to our most needy people. They're not getting paid any faster than our vendors, and it's making a lot of people that live off that check, you know, pretty nervous right now. But that's the right thing to do. And Leslie's doing the right thing. She's run an $800 million business with Helene Curtis. She knows, she comes from the business side, private sector, and she's doing a great job, and I think she should be elected comptroller. So the Republican Party is a party of Eisenhower, who built the interstate highway system. It's the party of Everett Dirksen, who ensured passage of the Civil Rights Act, and Ronald Reagan, who cut taxes and reduced red tape to lay the groundwork for one of the largest peacetime economic expansions in our history. And today in Illinois, the Republican Party is the party of the people. With growth and jobs and not taxes, we'll all be better off and be able to provide those desperate resources that our social service safety net provides for the most needy. We'll have a government that's run by, of, and for its citizens and taxpayers. Together, I think we can get it done. We have to not support the status quo and business as usual. Let's take a chance, turn direction, and vote Republican in November. Thank you very much.
What can we do to limit severely the number of nominating signatures required to get on the ballot, and to require that those signatures be collected by the candidate?
That's a good question. To my knowledge, we have not found it that onerous to go out and get the signatures necessary to run for the House and the Senate. And I don't personally, I'll speak personally, I actually don't see a problem with friends, neighbors, associates, people that believe in you, going out and getting signatures to support you. I appreciate it a great deal when my friends and neighbors come out and get signatures from me when I run for re-election or when I ran for election. So I haven't found it to be a real problem for people who truly want to get elected and work hard at it. And I don't think in House seats it's 1,000 votes or with 500 signatures, and in the Senate it's 1,000 signatures. It doesn't seem too onerous to me, and in most cases our candidates get 2, 3, and 4 times that many signatures.
Okay. Mark Weiermuller, City Club member and Donald Trump supporter, asks, did Trump win the debate last night? And with Trump visiting Bolingbrook tomorrow, does that mean that Illinois is in play?
Oh. I think hopefully a lot of you watched the debate last night. I watched it very intently. I thought it was, to me, honestly, the truth is I thought it was really kind of a draw last night. I don't think anything that happened last night in the debate changed anybody's mind. If you were going to vote for Hillary before the debate, you're going to vote for her after the debate. Donald Trump the same way. I would have liked to seen him, instead of spend most of his time rebutting the answers that Hillary Clinton gave, was come up, just answer the question that was given and give his own remarks on that as opposed to reacting. I think he'll learn from that in the next debate. I think he'll also want to bring up some of the things that we would like to see brought up last night, which would have been Benghazi, the emails, and some of the other things that he tried to bring up but didn't. With Donald Trump coming to Bolingbrook tomorrow, well, I'm the state party chairman. I love it when a presidential nominee comes to the state of Illinois. It's going to be remarkable. I've heard that there's going to be a great turnout. They've raised a tremendous amount of money for the candidate, and I just think it's terrific anytime we get a presidential nominee in town. Is Illinois in play? I don't think anybody knows. Now, they've written off Illinois. You know, all the pundits and everything have said that Illinois is, going to be blue. But I'll tell you, this is a different election. You go down to southern Illinois, and they're Trump. They're really rooting for this guy. He's got a great running mate in Mike Pence. I heard Mike Pence on CBS this morning. Just a terrific guy. So I think there are many states that have never been in play before that are in play this time, and who knows? Something could be remarkable could happen here in Illinois.
Dr. Kimball-Ladian, if you could do something to help reduce crime figures by 2020 on a bipartisan basis. Is that of interest to the Illinois Republican Party?
It's not only of interest to the Republican Party, I believe it's critical to the Republican Party. And I think the best way you reduce crime in our neighborhoods is to provide jobs. You know, how do you bring a kid out of poverty? You know, how do you get take anybody out of poverty? You give them a job. You know, our jobs, our economy is falling apart in most of these neighborhoods. So if you follow what our governor wants to do with his turnaround agenda, is bring jobs and bring businesses back to the state of Illinois. That's what we need. You know, there's jobs deserts out there. We're trying to create an infrastructure right now at the county where we want to take people from the south side by train all the way up to areas, you know, in the north and west suburbs to find them a job. Well, let's try and find them a job right where they live. Let's build some factories. Let's build some infrastructure down there. Well, the infrastructure's there, but let's try and fill those boxes that have been empty for a decade and put people back to work. And then I think you'll see the crime rate go down substantially.
Hi, I'm Jim McNamee, President of the Illinois Public Pension Fund Association. Since 1985, we worked to educate the public and those who serve as trustees and pension boards about issues that impact the financial health of publicly funded pensions. Our members manage over $18 billion in pension assets. That's a huge number. But we never forget those dollars belong to the men and women who've worked as firefighters, police officers, and as educators. We want them to know that their pension dollars are safely invested. They also want to know that someone will keep an eye on legislation that could threaten their pension. And that's why the Illinois Public Pension Fund Association is fighting against laws that would reduce the pensions earned by our members. And this is why we support the work of the Illinois Channel. Their unbiased, in-depth coverage of the pension reform issue allows us and our members to hear arguments on both sides of the pension issue, to follow legislation as it moves through committee, or to hear unedited interviews with key lawmakers as they discuss what changes are being considered. Pensions are very important. They're also very complex. Pension reform can't adequately be covered in sound bites. But the Illinois Channel provides a connection to the Capitol, the governor, and lawmakers that we all need to stay on top of key issues. Hi, I'm Jim McNamee, President of the Illinois Public Pension Fund Association. I watch the Illinois Channel, and I hope you do too.
Next from Springfield, former Governor Jim Edgar is joined with Chris Kennedy, a potential gubernatorial candidate and current chairman of Joseph Kennedy Enterprises, at a forum hosted by Andy Shaw of the Better Government Association to discuss the upcoming state elections, Governor Rauner's reform agenda, and their thoughts on the presidential campaign. This runs about 45 minutes.
So one quick thank you to a member of our Springfield Advisory Board, Karen Hasera, who is a former mayor of Springfield, served on the U of I board with Chris, and without Karen's endorsement, I think it would have been harder to get Chris here. But with Karen's endorsement, Chris said, whatever Karen wants, so here he is. And Jim Edgar, I give him, he has the ignominious distinction of being Illinois' last honest governor.
Heck with me. Take that.
That's kind of like being the tallest midget, right? Anyway.
Not really.
Oh, okay. It's better. All right, so let's start where I would have started if I'd still been in the news business, which is working right off the news. Last night, in case you might have been watching the football game, but if not, I think we had a presidential debate, and I noticed Governor Edgar's wearing his blue tie, which I think is not indicative of any change in stripes. But let me ask each of you what your thoughts were about the debate last night and what, if any, effect you see it having on the home stretch of the presidential campaign in either order.
Well, first of all, I've always worn blue, Andy. USA Today got it wrong when they did those counties back in 2000. Blue's always been my color. Now, I think a lot of you know, I'm not a great fan of Donald Trump, so what I say may be a little distorted because I went in a little with a bias, not caring for his candidacy. After watching the debate, I just reinforced that feeling. I just felt that on that debate, if that's what you're going to base who you're going to vote for president, Hillary Clinton was far better than Donald Trump. She was better prepared. She was better on the issues. She just seemed more presidential than he did. Now, saying that, Donald Trump has amazed me throughout this process. I never dreamed he'd be the Republican nominee for president, particularly after some of the things he said in his campaign, particularly the remark about John McCain. But he continues to roll right along. So that's my take, but my take, I've learned, is probably not maybe in the mainstream of the voters out there.
Well, maybe not the voters, Gov, but it certainly reflected what most of the debriefs afterwards suggested, and some of the polling suggested a fairly easy win for Hillary in the debate, which may or may not have any impact on the election. Chris, what do you think, not just the debate itself, but whether you think it's going to have any effect on what seems to be a dead heat right now?
I don't know whether it's a dead heat. I'd say that in all likelihood, Hillary wins this going away. Elections are really about votes, and this election is about the electoral college vote. The way she's positioned now gives her really an outsized chance to win, likelihood, and a really difficult path to victory for him. This election is interesting to me because it's the first time really since the Southern strategy was developed where the two candidates are fighting for the middle. They're fighting for the undecided. That hasn't happened in like 5 election cycles. The last election cycles were all about turning out our base, the Republican base or the Democratic base. This is really a fight for the middle, to get undecided voters to vote for one of those candidates. And I think based on that, Hillary won last night. I don't think there was anything that Trump said that would convert an undecided voter to his side. I think when they asked him a relatively softball and predictable question about race relations, what would he do about it? And he talks about law and order. That is not what undecided African Americans want to hear. And I think he loses on that. And when he loses on that, it makes it nearly impossible for him to win eventually.
And you had, now let's just segue really quickly into what has been, I covered presidential campaigns at NBC and ABC going back, I think to the mid-'70s, and I never remember a campaign season like this one. There have been odd ones, but nothing quite like this, and never a candidate quite like Trump. You had some thoughts about what the dynamic is this year, how somebody who's a reality star basically beats 15 people with arguably decent governmental service resumes.
Well, there's no doubt there's a lot of people out there unhappy with things. I think part of that is that's what they hear every day from the media about how bad things are. And so they want to change, and Trump would definitely be a change. But, this election, I don't think this election is all that much different. I still think this election is going to be about turnout, which in a presidential year usually is not a big issue, but particularly as I look at Illinois, Hillary Clinton should carry Illinois. We're basically a Democratic state. If she doesn't, then it's going to be a landslide for Donald Trump. But the key here, and I think maybe throughout the nation, is turnout, not the total number, but who turns out. I think Hillary Clinton has to do very well with African Americans, almost as well as Barack Obama, to be able to win. I'm not sure she was doing that well. I think last night helped her. Donald Trump, he's going to have to do well with blue-collar workers, people who maybe traditionally vote Democratic, but they might vote for him. I'm not sure, again, I agree with Chris, I don't think he won anybody over. The key for a lot of presidential elections, a lot of elections, have been suburban women. And I think it's still the key in this election. Suburban women are more times than not Republicans, but if they switch and vote Democrat, it's pretty hard for a Republican to win. And again, I think the debate last night probably helped Hillary Clinton in her attempt to win over those suburban, particularly women voters. So turnout's going to be the key. If she can get a good African-American turnout, if she can do well in the suburbs, then I think she'll win. If she doesn't do well, then I think that Donald Trump, with a lot of disgruntled voters out there, could do better than a lot of people thought. Now, I have to say, after the debate last night, I definitely think it was a huge plus for Hillary Clinton. We'll have to wait and see what the polls say.
Now, I covered you for many years and have known you for even longer, and I don't think I've ever seen you disaffected by a Republican candidate at this level quite like this. I mean, you've supported them all, maybe occasionally holding your nose, but what's the difference this year? Why is it so much harder for you with Trump?
Well, we don't have time for me to go through the whole list. But first of all, to me, a president, the most important thing that a president does is foreign policy. The economy is very important, but Congress has a say on that. President can get us in a war in a matter of seconds before Congress has a chance to even blink an eye. And so I think a presidential candidate has to have some preparation for international affairs. And again, I just don't see it with Donald Trump. In fact, his personality is such that I think it could cause us some real difficulties with, he says things off the cuff. Now, I have come to appreciate a lot of the things he has said, I don't think he really means. He does say things for shock, but a president can't do that. A president has to choose his words very carefully. How he or she conduct themselves is very important. And again, it just strikes me he just doesn't have that. And I've never voted for a Democrat for president. I've always voted for the Republican candidate. This will be the first time I will not vote for the Republican candidate for president. And I say that, and it kind of bothers me as a Republican, but the presidency is too important to let a partisan identification keep you from making the correct vote.
You'll be voting for Hillary or one of the third-party candidates?
It's a secret ballot.
Fair enough.
Well, you gave us half of a news lead. We just didn't get the other.
The others, and I've said the other before several times.
Oh, okay.
I mean, about not voting for Trump.
So, I'd say the thing about the Trump candidacy, and sort of reflected a little bit in the governor's remarks, is notion that he can say things that are outrageous, that he can lie, he can reverse position, he can do things that have never been allowed before in a presidential election. Nobody's ever gotten this far. And it's sort of incredible to me, and I think it's reflective of this notion that, you know, there have been these enormous swing votes the last 5-6 election cycles, really beginning with President Obama in 2009 and 2010. You'd see, you know, enormous swings, 2012, 2014. And I think there's this notion, this burnout, that people are sick of candidates making promises that they're going to bring change, that the Democratic Party is the party of change, that the Republican Party is the party of change. And those promises have not been kept. And there's this enormous frustration among Americans. I mean, we are not in a recession, but most Americans think we are. And they're mad. And they're like, I'm mad as hell, I'm not taking it anymore, I'd rather vote for that guy and blow the whole thing up. And that's a really ugly message that all the people in this room who are part of the establishment of either party, we need to worry about that.
But you don't think that's enough to carry the day? You think that in the key states, she still has the big edge?
I absolutely think she wins, and it's nearly impossible for him to win the Electoral College unless there's some enormous event that sways voters in the next 45 days. But that's not really the point. The point is, you know, half the primary voters voted for somebody who was willing to radically change the American economy. Most people don't like where the country's headed. They think we're on the wrong track.
That's the Trump and the Bernie Sanders phenomenon.
Absolutely. And the fact that so many people are willing to put up with a candidate who repeatedly lies, repeatedly changes his position, knows so little about what he's talking about, and they don't care. They're like, it doesn't matter. We're sick of the rest of you. We want your way of life to change radically. And that, I think, should scare everyone in this room.
So you've watched a lot of campaigns. I don't know if you were too young to help an uncle get elected president. You've watched a lot of campaigns. is there anything Hillary Clinton can do to disabuse people of this notion that she is a lying, dishonest, untrustworthy candidate? I think one of her biggest problems is people not knowing whether she'll carry some of those alleged traits into the White House where it's more dangerous. Set up offline systems in the White House and, foundation-related activities that undermine foreign policy. True or false, those things have been extraordinarily damaging to her image.
I think that she is not a natural candidate. That is not where she rose to power through, campaign cycles and being a charismatic politician. That's not where she's comfortable. She's never been comfortable on the stump giving speeches. She's comfortable in a conference room surrounded by a group of experts getting into the details. She's probably the most respected freshman senator in the last 50 years. And that goes for Democrats and Republicans. The Republicans who served with her think of her very highly. They think no one worked as hard as she did, got into the detail, understood the process, understood the ramifications, worked them, and tried to convince them to support her legislative agenda. They like that about her. But people who are good at that sort of wonkish stuff are not natural politicians. And I think that's what you're sensing. Someone who is trying to be somebody that they're not, which in this case is to be a politician. And she's not great at that. But she is incredible on the policy, and I think that carries the day.
Gov?
Well, I was just going to say, even though we're not speaking highly of Donald Trump, I still think he has a reasonable chance of getting elected president.
So you disagree with Chris about the important states being pretty
Well,
much...
I think they're leaning toward Hillary, but they're not leaning as well as they were, unless the debate last night changes a lot of mind, and I'm not sure, I'll believe that when I see it, just from past debates. So, again, this election is far from over, and, things could happen, new things could happen, but, every time Hillary begins to look like she's built up a lead, then it seems to disappear.
Let's leave one quick presidential question and then one more on the national scene. Prediction on Congress, both Senate and House. Senate looks like a toss-up. House, how do you pick up 40-plus seats? Either of you have a sense of one of those or the other going in an opposite direction from the current Republican holds?
If Donald Trump would just completely collapse now in the polls and among the voters, then perhaps you might see the Democrats be successful. The House, I think, is a farther stretch than the Senate, but I think both of those are in doubt as if this is as close as the polls have indicated. They're not going to get the bounce. The Democrats aren't from the presidential thing that maybe they thought a month ago. Now, we're still, how many days? 60 days? Well, I mean, there's still time that can all turn around. But right now, I don't think if I was the Democrats, I would feel quite as positive as maybe a month ago.
Chris, you've had a number of family members in Congress. I don't know, what do you have, a couple now? There's usually one or two at any given time. I can't remember.
There's one.
Just one.
I have a nephew, Joe
But so
Kennedy,
and I say that only because I know you pay closer attention since it's close to home. What's your sense of the two chambers and the likelihood of any change?
Well, as usual, I think the governor is, right on target in terms of what will happen in the presidential race and how that'll affect the races in both the Senate and the House. I don't think people ticket split like they used to in America. Generally, you'll vote straight party, even though it's harder and harder to do that, but people really don't do that as much. At least the exit polling has shown that. So I think what happens in the presidential race matters. But if you look at some of the overnight, I had access to some of the actually Republican data that came out last night where they had focus groups which were breaking, 17-3 in favor of Hillary. So I think she'll get a great bounce out of that debate. Whether Trump agrees to the next two debates, I think is very much up in the air.
You could actually see a candidate bail on a debate?
Oh, I think that's very...
Has that ever happened before?
I think he does not want to be... they're complaining about Lester Holt. I mean, really? What did he do wrong last night? And when you're complaining about the referee, it means you lost the game. And I think he's really worried about coming up against Anderson Cooper and is now trying to create this notion that there's bias in the mainstream media, and you were part of that. You can speak to that as well as anyone. And he may, drop out of those debates. He needs them more than she does, and I think he has to win the middle, and it's a really, really tough path to victory given the Electoral College.
One more question on the presidential one theory is that the Republican Party will have a hard time recovering from Trump. I think of these things as being short-lived. If he is to lose this election, I think it's almost like within a few months, it's like he never existed. And I think the party comes back. I mean, do you think that the party's going to have to do anything differently to recover if he loses the election?
Well, I think the party's going to have to go back and remember the lessons that I thought they learned 4 years ago when Romney lost to Obama. One area is the Hispanics. I mean, I can't imagine an Hispanic voting for Trump after the things he said. There are things we're going to have to get over. But I agree with you. I think that it's not like Trump has a lot of ties in the Republican Party, controls a lot of things in the party apparatus. I think that if he loses, he'll be gone.
Doomsday predictions tend to be really, really just momentary.
I mean, this country still is a two-party country, even though there's more Democrats and Republicans. It's still, when it comes to presidential politics, we go back and forth. And so I don't think this is the end of the Republican Party, but hopefully the Republican Party gets back on course and does a better job than I think we're doing right now, trying to appeal to the middle, because that's where most of the voters are. And unfortunately, our primaries have a tendency to, in the Republicans, the right has much more say, and in the Democrats, maybe certain left elements have more say. But in the general election, the middle is the key, and that's where most Americans are, and we need to, as a party, I think, understand that, and we need to move that way more than we have in the last few presidential races.
Do either of you have a prediction on Kirk Duckworth, and in the context of this historically being a state that favored Obama and kind of views Hillary in part as kind of like a homegrown candidate? She's more homegrown than Obama was, but I doubt if it's quite as easy for her as it was for him. What's your take on the impact on the Senate race with the dynamic that you're seeing in the presidential, if one affects the other at all?
Well, I'd just like to
sure.
make a follow-up comment to the notion of the future of the Republican Party. I think the country is much stronger if there are two parties and both parties are strong and they're both fighting for the middle. And one of the issues that I think comes up with the Trump comments, particularly about Latinos and Mexicans, is that I think suburban women, which is really an important swing vote, I think they don't want to vote for a racist. They don't want to vote for a racist. They need to hear that the leader of their party is not a racist. And I think Trump is not doing a good enough job dispelling that notion about himself, and he will alienate those suburban women from him. And I hope long-term we have two parties. That's what I'd say.
So Kirk Duckworth, a prediction or anything interesting? I mean, it's pretty unusual. You have two injured veterans, injured in different ways, but two people who qualify for disability assistance.
Well, I think right now, probably, I mean, the polls show it's leaning toward Duckworth, but huge undecided. I mean, it's amazing how many undecided voters. Now, historically, undecided voters have a tendency to go for the non-incumbent, but I'm not sure that many people haven't. Opinion yet on Mark Kirk even though he's been in the Senate for 6 years. The fact that he has distanced himself from Donald Trump, I think will help him in those suburban areas that he's going to need to pick up some votes. The question, does that alienate, particularly downstate, some Republicans that may not vote? I think in the end they'll vote for him. So I really think that race might be closer than the polls indicate right now. But it hasn't got that much traction. You don't hear many people talking about it. And so as a result, even fortunately, we no longer have straight party voting in Illinois, which I thought was a terrible thing, and we don't have it. Still, that race will be affected maybe more by the presidential outcome because it hasn't got as much attention as maybe it warranted.
Well, there's going to be, I haven't played, not as a political reporter anymore, I'm going to guess there's a debate or two that'll come up with those two and more ads. Do you think that basically there just isn't enough oxygen in the room for that race?
I think the only debates people watch are the presidential debates. I was in gubernatorial debates, and outside of a few insiders, I'm not sure how many people watched them.
You don't think everybody watched those debates that I moderated when you were running for Secretary of State?
Well, that one I know nobody watched it, even the moderator. Yeah. But no, I think debates are overrated. Presidential debates, there's no doubt the Nixon-Kennedy, the first debate had an impact because Nixon didn't look good and Kennedy looked presidential and brought him up. I think the Bush debate with Al Gore, that first debate, changed that election. That's probably the one that had the most impact. If you remember, George W. was about 10 points behind Al Gore, and then Al Gore, they spent an hour and a half with him for the first time, and I think they decided they didn't want to spend 4 years with him. The numbers just changed overnight. That was probably the most decisive presidential debate.
I can't remember if he yawned or something. It was kind of, he had a disaffected look that basically haunted him.
Well, every time Bush said something, he kind of grunted. And, now Trump did that. I don't know what Trump, if he had a cold last night or what, but he should not have brought up stamina, I didn't think, the way he was acting in that debate. But I don't think that'll have a huge impact on the Senate race unless somebody says something very outlandish. But my guess is they'll be very guarded.
I think Duckworth's story resonates with people. I think that particularly this year, and really is a counterbalance to the terrible rhetoric of the Trump campaign. But that notion of an immigrant family serving the country, being wounded, giving about as much as you can, and then the perseverance. People like that narrative, and they will respond to it as they tune into this election.
There's a theory out there I've heard nationally that people might end up, some Republicans, some independents will vote for Hillary, but they want a check and balance, and then they'll go vote for the Senate Republican candidate, so they have a check and balance. Americans love that check and balance. And I think
that would help Kirk.
I think Mark Kirk, because Mark Kirk has, as a senator, has a very moderate voting record. He's positioned himself. He's broken with the party on some issues. So, I think that could help him. In Illinois, I think that's one of the reasons he won 6 years ago. He was viewed as a moderate. So, I think that race might be closer than a lot of people think today because, again, there's so many undecided. And how they break will determine that election.
I think that's a really great point, that notion that people are concentrating more on the Senate races now and instead of the presidential race, particularly the insiders. And you look at the Koch brothers basically abandoning the presidential race, unhappy with Donald Trump, and really concentrating their funding efforts on the Senate races for the very reasons that the governor lays out, the notion of checks and balances and their ability to perhaps preserve the Senate majority. But the thing with Kirk is he's not polling well enough, and that big money, particularly the Koch brothers' money, is not flowing to him. They've made a decision about that race. And the problem with those guys making a decision about your race, if they think you're unwinnable, they're not going to invest in it because they don't get any return on that investment. And they're like bell cows. They are going to lead the rest of the big Republican donor base, and they will all decide now not to support Kirk. And you really need that big money coming into these races. And it'll hurt his ability to compete over the next 6 weeks, which leaves him at a huge disadvantage as he goes into the last part of the election cycle.
I don't want to bog down with a lot of the reform stuff I talked about in the first half of the program. That's our watchdog work. That's our mission.
Come on, give that speech again.
I've given it twice. I gave it in Chicago 2 weeks ago at a fundraiser there. All I did was recycle the same language minus the Chicago references and a thanks to Jeff and Jennifer. That was the only
This is
change.
all original material from the governor.
That's right.
That's what you're getting from us.
Hey, so just one question. And take your pick between the Supreme Court decision on the maps and AVR, any of those reform issues that you think are really important going forward, or do you think that we're off base in putting so much? Look, I happen to think that there's just too many disengaged, disaffected people out there, and we've got to bring them back into the fold. And the only way we do it is to reconstruct the system to basically favor the participants, not the insiders.
Well, I'd say you had a great list of reforms, but the notion of going to an elected body and saying, will you willingly impose limits on your careers or make it more difficult for you to get elected, like, that's crazy talk. And I think the one thing that you might have added to that list is the notion of...
I got a shrink appointment in 15 minutes, so we better wrap this up.
But the notion of citizen-led referendum, and that's very difficult to do in Illinois. And if you want great change, that's a route in.
Well, that's a great thing to say, Chris, because that invites a question for the governor, because it goes back to where you and Dawn Netsch were, was it 4 or 8 years ago? There was a lot of talk about having another convention like set 1970 to deal with a lot of these things, and you and Netsch formed an odd couple alliance, having beaten her in the governor's race, in which you both were against a convention. I believe it was the same grounds: too expensive for too little benefit, or maybe insiders would control it the same way they do the system now. But do you think, given what's happened in the courts and what's going on, that maybe it's time to revisit it again?
No, I'm not. It hasn't gone that far. I think that'd be rewriting the Constitution. I think would be extremely dicey. There's nothing wrong with our Constitution. What's wrong is some of the people we elect, and I think people need to pay a little more attention who we're nominating. And that's the key. The primaries. We got to have more people. So the list you had up there, I have to say, the open primary, moving the primary to the summer, I think that's great. I tried that. In fact, I brought the parties together when I was governor, when I proposed an open primary. Republicans and Democrats came together to defeat that. Because it's kind of, Chris pointed out, you're challenging the status quo. I mean, they got elected under the old system. They don't want to change that. But I do think more people in the primary and would be good. I think a primary in the summer, not in the dead of winter, would be good. I think changing how we do districts, and I did redistricting when I was a staffer.
And you supported the map amendment?
I support the map. I think that's important. I think all those are good. Now, is that the most important thing facing Illinois? No. The most important thing facing the state of Illinois is to get a balanced budget.
Exactly.
That just... everything else pales compared to that. So I agree with your list, but as far as what Illinois ought to be doing right now, state government, we need a budget. We need a good budget, because this state is falling apart.
Well, that's our event after the election. Let's one thing at a time.
Well, but that, I think, enters into the election to some extent. I don't think any of these issues are going to sway this election. At the state level, we haven't talked about the state. I don't know if you want to move into that.
I'd like you to. Well, so. And you broke with the governor on this whole issue of priorities and strategy.
Well, I broke on, we disagree. I think the budget is so important, we shouldn't have other things as contingents before we do a budget. I think the budget needs to be done, a good balanced budget, which means ample appropriations and ample revenues. It's going to be cuts, it's going to be taxes. I mean, it's not going to be pretty, it's not going to be easy, but that's what we need. But that is what I think some of the other things he's done, he's a very active guy. I think he's done some good things. I think that's where I really.
And how about the administration argument that once you do the budget, you have no leverage for the other things?
Governor has leverage.
The turnaround agenda is dead because you have nothing to leverage it with.
Well, I think a governor, if you get a good budget, you're going to get this state moving. Right now, this is not the purpose of this thing today, is to talk about these issues, but
a couple.
you know, I worry about what's happened to higher education in the last year. And we have thousands of young people in Illinois leaving Illinois to go to school out of state because of these budget problems. And to me, economically, that's the most important thing to our future is brain power and these young people. And if they go away to school, they may never come back. So again, I think if you want to get this state moving again, we've got need to get a good budget in place. Unfortunately, for many years before Governor Rauner was there, we did not have a good budget, balanced budget. And this is a problem that's been festering for years. We need to deal with it now. But I don't know how much impact in this election. I do think the budget resolution is an issue in the state elections. I mean, if you look at this state election, this is a unique state elections.
Yeah, what do you think of an election in which collectively we could see $50 million spent for these legislative races between the two sides?
Well, and most of it coming from one side. I mean, Governor Rauner has provided more money than I've ever dreamed it would be in Illinois politics. The numbers we're hearing that's being spent. Now, the Democrats, Madigan's always been pretty good at raising money. Nothing compared to what Rauner is injecting into this election. And what impact that's going to have, I don't think we know yet. My take on the state when it comes to legislative races, it's hard to defeat a downstate incumbent. They're well known. Unless there's a scandal or redistricting, it's hard to beat them. So I'm not sure all that money that's being poured in to try to defeat some of these Democrats downstate will be successful. Though I do think Trump will run well downstate.
Well,
that might help.
Now a lot of money's flowing into the comptroller's race.
Well, let me finish. Let me get started. In the suburbs, though, where I don't think people know their legislators as well, they're much more apt to go how the top of the ticket goes. They're more apt to respond to television. And the amount of money that Governor Rauner has been able to provide to Republicans in these legislative races is huge. And I think that's going to buy a lot of television time up there for legislative candidates, which is very unusual. That very well could have an impact. And I think if Republicans are going to make gains in these legislative races, they have a better shot in the collar counties where this money, I think, will have an impact as opposed to downstate. Now, the offsetting thing is Governor Rauner's numbers are not very good personally. I mean, his numbers are upside down downstate. In the city, it doesn't really matter. There's no really legislative races, maybe that McAuliffe race a little bit. But in the suburbs, his numbers aren't as bad, so that's not going to be as much of a problem. But it's going to be kind of Rauner's money versus Rauner's record. And I think in the suburbs, Rauner's money is going to probably
Republicans are making Madigan the issue.
We've made Madigan the issue for years. I mean, when I ran for governor re-election, I had quadruple bypass surgery. I dedicated one of the bypasses to Mike Madigan. I mean, we've done that. And most voters, they're not voting on him. The governor is a much more visible thing than the speaker, I think. Now, I will say, I think the Madigan name has been tarnished in the last 2 years. Between the Tribune and Rauner and all, I think the name statewide has got a problem. But I don't think that's going to affect legislative races as much as the governor. But I think Rauner's money, particularly in the suburbs, could offset that. Controller's race. We talked before, and I was going to talk more state anyway. The controller's race, I thought, until recently, we don't elect the U of I trustees anymore. We used to in Illinois. Political scientists loved that. That was how you could figure out who was the base Republican voter, who was the base Democratic voter. We don't do that anymore. I thought the controller's race was going to be that because that's really hard to get people excited about. There's no special interest that care really about the controller. It's not like Treasury, at least the banks do. So it's hard to raise money. People don't get excited about it. Maybe a few insiders do. So I thought that's going to be who's Republicans, who's Democrats. Now that apparently we've blown the caps, and that means Governor Rauner can come in and provide millions for his appointee as controller. I think unless the Democratic candidate can come up with anything like that, and I don't know where she's going to get it because I don't know who gives it to controller.
Alderman Burke in Chicago has $10 million in a campaign fund and likes her a lot.
Well, he's going to have to like her an awful lot to offset the money that Governor Rauner could put in.
Yeah.
And whoever, let's say the Republican candidate has 3 million, or she gets 4 million, and the Democratic candidate has 1 million. The Republican candidate's going to win that race, I think, just because people are going to know her. They're not going to know the Democratic candidate. So, again, the money in that race could have a huge impact. And I don't think political scientists will be able to use that as the benchmark of Republican and Democratic voters in Illinois.
Chris, what about you?
Well, I'd just echo
to the extent
I'd
you want
like
in
to
Illinois.
echo the first comment about the importance of the budget. When I was running the Merchandise Mart Center, more companies moved to Illinois to open an office for the first time at the Mart Center than any other location in the state by a mile. And let's say there were 5,000 companies and exhibitors that I dealt with during that period. Not one of those companies who moved to Illinois, opened an office, hired people, paid taxes here, not one of them ever asked me about redistricting reform or term limits or tort reform or workers' comp. Nobody ever asked. But now, as we're building on Wolf Point, we've got $1 billion development. You know, the investors, the folks from all over the world, why should we invest in the only state that doesn't have a budget? It's rattling people. It's taking a state budget problem that's very clear to all of you and turning it into a statewide economic crisis. And it's scaring people away. It's creating uncertainty, and that is bad for the economy. And that's the biggest issue that we need to deal with. I agree with the governor's assessment of, you know, the downside. I think people like Gary Forby and Brandon Phelps are so well known to they have a personal relationship with their voters. Really difficult to move on them. And then it's a little more chaotic in the suburbs. I would say that Susana Mendoza, who's running for controller, she is so charismatic that it would take a lot of money, I think, to offset, you know, her story and her personal charisma. I think she's terrific.
All right, we've got a couple more minutes. Let me just ask if each of you has a final thought about this election season, and I have one last question then. So you had a few thoughts at the beginning, whether you've shared them already, but it's been, again, an arguably wacky season. I think the word chaos in the title of our event fits this year pretty well. Final thoughts as we head into the last 60 days.
Well, I mean, I wish we could have this after the election. I could sound much more intelligent about how the election is going to go. In the nation, I mean, Donald Trump is just unusual. I mean, we've never had a presidential candidate, I don't think, in the 21st or the 20th century like him. So, you know, we kind of insiders, we people who've been around the process, we kind of have certain standards or things you can and can't do. He kind of tossed that book out the window. Now, whether that works or not, we won't know for sure. So that's an unknown. And how that affects other people on the ticket, we don't really know. In the state election, we have never seen this kind of money involved in legislative races. Never anything like this. And it's unusual, too. You've never seen... and I will give Governor Rauner a lot of credit. They're good at politics. They think politics. But we've never seen the governor have as much control on legislative races as this time. And whether that works or not, I don't know. As I said, we'll have to wait and see how that turns out. So there are a lot of unknowns going into November that I don't think we can sit here and talk till the cows come in, and I'm not sure we really can predict what's going to happen.
So the takeaways for November 9th will be the effect of so much money in legislative races, in the comptroller's race, money versus more charisma, and maybe nationally, whether we've entered the era of reality TV candidates, and maybe Trump isn't the last one. Maybe Geraldo Rivera runs next time. I mean, I'm just saying, so we'll have to wait till the 9th.
As strange as that sound and outrageous, after what's happened this year, I wouldn't discount it.
Chris, final thoughts on the last 60 days in this season?
I'd say that the people who are here today really represent the establishment in both of our parties, and the most likely to get involved, the most thoughtful, engaged citizens of this community. And I think we need to listen to these voters. They are raging. This is anger. You know, we grew up as the American dream of rising from rags to riches was the promise of our country. A place where anyone could make it. And people don't believe in that anymore. They're upset, they're angry, and they're willing to destroy everything we have if we don't fix that. And that's the message of this election.
And let me leave with one question that is sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the room. If I don't ask it, I will lose all credibility as a former news guy and watchdog. So when we put this together several months ago...
Is the governor going to run?
Well, we
I
tried...
wish he would.
Yeah, right. Quick story. When Jim was trying to figure out whether to run for a third term or the Senate, he was recovering from illness. And the question was, which would he run for? He ended up running for neither. I went to the state fair, and there was a fortune teller. So I went to the fortune teller, put a story on the news, what's the governor going to do? Well, the fortune teller told us that he was going to run for the Senate. History tells us he chose to run for neither. And if you want to thank him for something that's really nice, he gave us George Ryan, for better or worse. Anyway, thanks, Gov. No, but let me ask you, so when we put this together, you know, Karen recommended you. We thought it'd be great. You know, we're we don't want to help you with a campaign that may or may not take place. You don't want to use us when we're. So give us an update on whether or not you think we'll see you in the governor's race, since I know you've been taking a close look at the possibility.
No one in Illinois wants to talk about a 2018 race right now. All they're thinking about is 2016. I mean, I get poll calls 5 times a night at home. There's TV ads. You know, let's worry about this election, one election at a time. Thank you, Andy.
Why was that? Are we going to let him get away with that? Yes. Thank you.
Good job. Good job, Chris.
Chris, thanks.
Thank you, Andy.
Gov, thanks. Listen, thank you all for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a little bit different. We'll be back down here in a month or so for something totally different, probably civic engagement, post-election. Anyway, back to work or wherever. And thanks so much for supporting our watchdog work. And thanks to...
The Illinois Channel salutes our advisory council members, leaders in business, education, law, medicine, and other fields from across Illinois.
Hi, I'm Phil Garnett, President of the Illinois Coal Association. Illinois is blessed with an abundance of coal. In fact, coal lies under 65% of Illinois land, and coal is used to provide half of the nation's energy needs, abundant and domestic. With energy independence at the top of our national agenda, Illinois coal mines, like the one here in Williamsville, must be part of our national discussion on energy. That's why the Illinois Coal Association supports the work of the Illinois Channel. Their extensive coverage of the role